Okay, we'll move on to our first panel of the morning, and that is on the Army's number 5 priority, air and missile defense. Come on, yep, come on up. And we're very, very honored this morning to have a great panel assembled. The panel will be chaired by the Senior Mentor for Air and Missile Defense, Lieutenant General Jim Dickinson, the Commanding General of the United States Army Space and Missile Defense Command. General Dickinson, we're glad that you are here. And with some trepidation, I'll introduce the panel moderator, Lieutenant General retired Dick Formica, Vice President, Caliber Systems. General Dickinson and General Formica, please a warm welcome for the Air and Missile Defense panel. Thank you.
Good morning. General Ham, thank you for that introduction for this panel. And thank you, General Perna, and to all the leaders, past and present, who are in attendance. What a great week it's been for us as AUSA has partnered with AMC, with Team Redstone, with the Huntsville-Madison community to bring this Global Force Symposium here to this great location so that we can address the challenges and opportunities of modernizing and equipping America's Army for today and tomorrow. In addition to thanking AUSA for this symposium, this is always a good opportunity to look AUSA and all of its staff in the eye and thank you for what you do for our Army, for soldiers and families each and every day. Thank you, AUSA. This week, we've learned from our Army senior leadership about the establishment of Army Futures Command. We've heard from 4 of the 6 cross-functional teams already, and we're encouraged by what they will bring to accelerate the acquisition of critical materiel capabilities across the 6 modernization priorities that have been established by the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. And of course, we are reminded that this cannot be just about equipping. The Army must remain true to its approach to integrate its force modernization, force development process across all lines of .mil PF. And while the CFTs are focused on key initiatives, there remains a full portfolio of systems to modernize. So this morning, this panel will take on modernizing the Army's air and missile defense force. AMD is a core capability of our Army. It's core to protecting our critical assets, our forces, and our allies. It's a core capability that we provide to the Joint Force and is in high demand by combatant commanders. It's for that reason that it is rightly one of the 6 cross-functional teams established by our Army to accelerate the acquisition of critical capabilities. To get after this discussion, AUSA has assembled an expert panel. Our senior mentor, as General Ham has already introduced, is the Commanding General of U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command, Army Forces Strategic Command, and also serves as U.S. STRATCOM's Commanding General of the Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense. Our CFT lead and panel lead is Brigadier General Randy Mcintire, who also serves as the Commandant of the U.S. Army Air Defense Artillery School. Then Mr. Barry Pike, who you saw earlier in the Long Range Precision Fire CFT and is the Program Executive Officer for Missiles and Space. Dr. Tom Carrico is a Senior Fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, and he serves as its International Security Program Director of the Missile Defense Project. And then finally, Mr. Bill Colson brings experience as the former Director of the Tech Center in the Space and Missile Defense Command, and he currently serves as the Director of the Senior College Fellowship at the Defense Acquisition University here in Huntsville, and you may have heard a little bit about that from Mr. Lum at the Long Range Precision Fires panel. So we'll get started, and I'm pleased to introduce our senior mentor, Lieutenant General Jim Dickinson.
Thanks, General Formica. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, it's a great day to be an air and missile defender, right?
Oh.
All right. General Ham, thanks again for putting on a great week here. I want to particularly thank you and your team for what you do for Army Air and Missile Defense. We just had a AUSA Hot Topics for Integrated Air and Missile Defense a few weeks ago. We were very pleased that we got the opportunity to have General Hyten, my boss, speak at that particular Hot Topics, and I think we were very successful in that endeavor a couple of weeks ago, along with all the dinners we do throughout the year where we pull in industry as well as warfighters and exchange good ideas. So in fact, we've got one coming up next week. So General Ham, thanks for what you do for integrated missile defense every day. General Formica, I do have to put a plug in for you. Really wearing a suit these days with a tie, but really supporting the warfighter almost as much today as you did while you were on active duty. And thanks for what you do each and every day for Army Integrated Missile Defense. So today, we're going to talk for a few minutes, and my purpose this morning is to provide some strategic framing, if you will, for this panel. And this is truly a good time to be in air and missile defense. And I would tell you from a joint perspective, but I won't talk too much about that this morning. I'm going to talk from an Army Air and Missile Defense perspective, because it is a great day to be an Army Air and Missile Defender when you look at all the support and advocacy that we get from the greater community, from all the way from Capitol Hill, and we saw that last week with the passage of the appropriations and the budget, where the Army Air and Missile Defense got a very good, sizable budget that we will be able to work with this year, as well as the advocacy that we get from the combatant commanders and certainly from the Army leadership, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. So it is an honor for me to be the senior mentor on this panel today. We've got a very talented panel that was just introduced by General Formica, and we'll get to them here in a few minutes. But what I'm going to do is share some thoughts with you before we get started with each of the panel members. So the guidance we've received from Secretary Esper, Undersecretary McCarthy, General Conville, and this morning from the Assistant Secretary, Dr. Jetty, has been very, very encouraging. I know we're all motivated to make the Army's vision for 2028 happen and align what we're doing toward the objectives Secretary Esper described earlier this week. The Air and Missile Defense cross-functional team will have to consider how it might impact these objectives as the Army incorporates them by propagating the doctrine of multi-domain battle into its schools, into professional development courses, as well as supporting the organization of robust, agile, and lethal tactical formations that have sufficient capability and capacity in all warfighting functions. Ensuring the Army's manning efforts and realistic training produces the air and missile defense warfighters the future requires. And finally, our most pressing task, which we'll talk about today, is equipping the force with the most advanced modern weapon systems and doing it very quickly. We've received strong positive messages on modernization in both the national and Army strategic guidance. The National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy are clear that the U.S. military must do more to maintain and advance our lethality and technical advantage, and we must do it faster. We are focusing now primarily toward that long-term strategic competition and the potential for high-intensity conflict. The challenges of great power competition with China and Russia, the destabilizing threats from rogue nations and regimes of North Korea and Iran, and the continuing fight against terrorism present us with a wide and growing range of threat capabilities that air and missile defenders must be ready to defeat. Our tiered and layered missile defenses must include left-of-launch options, which may open up further aspects of multi-domain battle and a greater conceptual development of what we can do with emerging and cross-domain technologies. Brigadier General Randy Mcintire will provide some thoughts on what multi-domain battle is going to mean for air and missile defense forces and how we will get the necessary capabilities rapidly out to the warfighters of 2028. Even before the new national strategies were published, the Army was moving to address the changing and operational threat environment. I'm referring to the memo last October establishing our 6 modernization priorities, including the priority for air and missile defense capabilities that ensure our future combat formations are protected from modern and advanced air and missile defense fires, including drones. This is a very large task when we consider the continually growing threat capabilities of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and the rapid proliferation of all types of drones, and to include their new TTPs that our adversaries have been testing with. It's a tall order for sure, and for that part of it, Mr. Barry Pike will discuss efforts to support Army modernization priorities and accelerating delivery of capabilities. The memo outlined the challenges with our modernization processes that we've all experienced, the bureaucratic, stovepipe nature of the system that so often impedes our ability to rapidly develop and field the capabilities warfighters require. As General Abrams stated last November at the 3rd Annual Future Combat Vehicles Conference, we've experienced many past failures due to gold-plated requirements, the siren song of leap-ahead technology too immature for system applications, or unrealistic program timelines. And just last month, as I mentioned earlier, General Hyten, my boss, at the Army Air and Missile Defense Hot Topics, put it this way. He said, "We have to go back to understanding risk, understanding how to test, understanding acquisition, understanding requirements, and getting a budget and moving fast. That is what our nation is calling us to do." So we have a mandate for more rapid force modernization against a growing range of air and missile defense threats, and at the crux of the problem is a system that's not built to support success. Futures Command and the cross-functional teams are meant to move us past that industrial age modernization system and toward a more agile and responsive approach to ensure our current and future warfighters are set up to win. The national security strategy requires that we, quote, regain the element of surprise and field new technologies at the pace of modern industry. Government agencies must shift from an archaic R&D process to an approach that rewards rapid fielding and risk-taking. Under General Mcintire's leadership, the Air and Missile Defense CFT will provide a more efficient, flexible, and responsive process to expedite decision-making for a potential program of record, informed by experimentation and technical demonstrations, teaming, agility, and rapid feedback. The National Defense Strategy also states, success no longer goes to the country that develops a new technology first, but rather to the one that better integrates it and adapts its way of fighting. As we see cross-domain applications and emerging technologies being rapidly integrated across the commercial sector, we have to ask ourselves, what is the third offset for AMD? We heard Secretary Esper talk about some of that. In 10 years, we'll begin to field both manned and unmanned combat vehicles, aircraft, sustainment systems, and weapons, and we'll be incorporating more autonomy, robotics, and artificial intelligence. To do that, we must aggressively leverage industry partners to identify and develop leap-ahead capabilities. There is also a wealth of knowledge and experience we must continue to leverage in academia and think tanks. And from that perspective, Dr. Tom Carrico is going to talk about concepts for creating a new architecture for the integrated air and missile defense force to boost flexibility and resilience. So in the air and missile defense arena, the CFT is focusing on capabilities that include mobile short-range air defense, or MSHORAD, as well as directed energy and advanced energetics. We're working on a couple of initiatives in these areas. The Chief of Staff of the Army's #1 air and missile defense priority is SHORAD for maneuver forces, and we have initiated a MANPADS, or Man-Portable Air Defense pilot program to address this immediate gap. The initial SHORAD capability consists of ground maneuver man-portable air defense teams trained to protect the maneuver forces. To date, we've trained over 208 soldiers, or 104 MANPAD teams, enhancing our brigade combat team's survivability. In directed energy, we are also seeing positive results from vehicle-mounted high-energy lasers. The mobile experimental high-energy laser, which is a 5 kW laser mounted on a Stryker combat vehicle, has successfully engaged targets including UAVs during maneuver fires integration experiments at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Today, that system is in Germany with the 2nd Cavalry Regiment for further demonstration and evaluation during the Joint Warfighting Assessment. SMDC's Tech Center turned the system over to the unit and provide a very minimal amount of training to 2 soldiers who were then able to engage and defeat all the targets in a limited live fire demonstration. We are looking at options for more powerful lasers and are fitting our high-energy laser mobile test truck, which is a HEMT-based laser capacity up to 50 kWs for demonstration later this year. and we expect to test a 100 kilowatt laser in the near future. One other example of what we're doing today to support a tiered and layered and agile and interoperable air and missile defense capability is the Integrated Battle Command System, or IBCS, which will ultimately link not only Army sensors and shooters, but those in the Joint Force as well. So we are working on addressing the lower tier threats and integrating Army air and missile defense, joint air and missile defense forces, and we're also developing greater interoperability and partnership with our allies and partners through a variety of exercises, such as Nimble Titan, as well as Tobruk Legacy. So going forward, we'll leverage the CFT to move faster and take advantage of strategic partnerships with industry. We'll look to industry partners for innovative technologies that will enable us to accelerate delivery of revolutionary capabilities to the warfighter. As we begin to change our acquisition culture from a slow and risk-averse mindset to one with an accelerated delivery mindset, we will need workforce training that supports this. So today we'll hear from Mr. Bill Colson on how DAU is thinking about supporting this new mindset. So the last thing I want to cover with you this morning is the ongoing efforts that we're doing right now to update the Army Air and Missile Defense Strategy. The current strategy, published in 2012, is derived from the Army Guidance to Prevent, Shape, and Win. In 2015, we published Waypoint Number 1 to the strategy, which was a bridging strategy to a more comprehensive revision. So we have, in fact, started this revision and the plan to have a new AMD strategy in 2018, which will focus on the 2018 to the 2028 timeframe and be nested with our national strategies and aligned with the Army's vision for 2028. It will include a full or holistic .mil-PF review accounting for the change in operational environment, the evolving threat, and emerging technologies, and it will also address all domains. The lines of effort for the new strategy are: 1, to develop air and missile defense capabilities, recognizing that building capabilities to match today's threat is insufficient to tomorrow's threats, and we need to aggressively leverage industry partners and others to identify and develop that leap-ahead capabilities. Second line of effort is to provide sufficient air and missile defense capacity to meet demand and finding new structural and capability solutions as this increasingly complex operational environment places an even higher demand on our low-density forces. Third, provide trained and ready air and missile defense forces with the understanding that readiness is in fact the Army's top priority, and it demands that we always look for better ways to develop human capital, maintain and sustain our equipment, and build resiliency into our forces. And finally, fourth, is to build partner capacity and maintain forward presence, because the threat outnumbers our capacity many times over, and we do not fight alone, but alongside allies and partners with whom we must be able to operate seamlessly. So as we start to realize the advantages of the Futures Command and the CFTs will offer us, these lines of effort, nested and aligned with the lines of effort Secretary Esper described for the Army vision, will guide us toward rapidly integrating and synchronizing the requirements development process, the acquisition process, and our resources. The framework will continue to enable us to deliver effective and dominant air and missile defense capabilities to the sensors, shooters, and interoperable command and control systems that are critical, absolutely critical, in protecting our homeland, our forces, and winning our nation's wars. So in line with our theme of modernizing and equipping America's Army for today and tomorrow, we are bringing together the tools we need: our national strategies, our Army vision, multi-domain battle, our modernization priorities, and the CFTs, and soon the updated AMD strategy. So at this point, John Formica, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for providing that strategic context. I didn't say this at the outset, but General Dickinson takes the time to provide that context. The rest of the panel members, a few minutes each. We're going to give the CFT lead about 10, but we want to get through their opening statements and leave about half of our time for your thoughtful questions, and we're looking forward to that exchange. So without further ado, General Mcintire.
This working?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, good morning, and thanks, audience, for hanging in here on the third day and staying with us. Really appreciate this opportunity to tell the story about what the CFT's been working on for the past several months. Our activities have focused on, of course, forming the organization, developing a mission statement, drafting charters, doing a mission analysis. I would tell you that the perspective that I brought to being dual-hatted as a Commandant and a CFT Director was, I think, highly beneficial because I understood the portfolio and I kind of understood what we needed to do to restore the air defense branch, certainly in its capability to protect the maneuver force and reduce the risk to that. Our mission statement, as you see, the optimum word within that mission statement, it really is drive. It's to drive the modernization priorities. As Dr. Jetty talked earlier about, don't focus so much on the process, but let's get to the product. And so we focused on getting quick wins. I think all the CFTs had a slightly different approach, different portfolios, different challenges. I took an approach using the National Defense Strategy, my time spent with General Hicks in strategy plans and policy kind of informed my approach. So what I wanted to do was get after our pacing threat, and that was our first project was the maneuver short-range air defense. As General Dickinson talked about earlier, it was the Chief's #1 priority for the portfolio. The second one was we took a look at what was going on in the Pacific and what we could do in that theater to improve our stance as well. So we took 2 major projects to accelerate the maneuver SHORAD, get that director requirement approved. I think it was a good quick win. Within about 2.5 months, we were able to get a signature on that document so we could start producing things and getting that into the acquisition cycle. From a Commandant's perspective, I think it was very important. I'm looking at the entire dot mil PF as we're starting to develop M domain projects, how they fit in, and how we resource that. It was interesting in October at AUSA where the chief got up and he highlighted the 6 priorities, and I was kind of on the edge of my seat as he went through the first 4 priorities, and the chief brilliantly stated, and all this doesn't matter if you're dead. And that, he was talking about those first priorities, and when he got to 5, and that's why we need air defense protection. And it really gets into how we intend to fight in multi-domain battle. So our activities have been, how do you enable multi-domain battle in the 3rd dimension? And that's given our maneuver forces the ability to penetrate that A2AD bubble, giving them some capability that can move with them and protect them as we use the land forces with fires and maneuver to penetrate the A2AD bubble to open up other domains. So with that in mind, we charted out what can we do for maneuver short-range air defense, and we went through analysis, and as we went through that process, we got a lot of warfighter input. We started with USRA. Actually, we started with General Hodges at the beginning of this. It transitioned to Major General McGuire. We came back stateside and got General Abrams' input from FORSCOM. We talked to General Brown from USTRPAC, and most recently, we talked to General Townsend from TRADOC, and we got their input on what we were trying to do to make sure that we are developing capability that would be combined arms approach and a formation-based capability for a combined arms effort, and that we were in sync with what our senior leaders and mentors thought we needed to do, and we weren't in this alone. Our second project, we listened to General Brooks and what he needed in his theater, as we've got upper tier and lower tier integration challenges with, for the first time, Patriot and THAAD systems working side by side. So we saw a lot of efficiencies that we can do that can go from that COCOM to other COCOMs to really enhance our ability to protect the forces to increase battle space, to increase the number of defended assets, and just be more efficient. So those are our two major projects that we talked about. We also spent a lot of time on aligning our science and technology efforts to make sure that the efforts that are out there align with the future, and that we're, as Dr. Jetty talked about earlier, do we have programs of record, do we have a PM, do we have something that they can transition to past that valley of death that makes sense in terms of what we're investing in to get the things that we need for the future. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about our significant project and really how we intend to get after what we call 10X capability. In the near term swim lane, we talk about using existing capabilities. And this is for maneuver short-range air defense. We're in line with the total Army analysis to grow this capability. We took existing guns, missile mixes. This is a really good news story. 2 years ago, we weren't talking about short-range air defense. And the chief got very excited about what we're going to do about our pacing threat. And as General Dickinson talked about earlier, we needed to do something quickly, so we started what's in the inventory, went after Stinger teams, and now we're developing capability on a platform that can keep up with the new maneuver force. But the big idea here is over time in the mid-range, you start to see directed energy to get cut into the formation. So as we continue to mature, that technology will become less gun missile mix, and we will have directed energy, so we'll have a mix of capability in our formations in the future. We also see that we'll need composite organizations to be able to cover our formations. So the battalion will have a formation on a Stryker platform that will go with the brigade combat teams. It also have a battery of a multi-mission launcher, or IFPC capability, that can protect fixed and semi-fixed assets. So talking about a tiered and layered approach, again, there's no silver bullet when you take a look at our threat systems from the tactical level with RAM, rockets, artillery, and mortars, to our counter-UAS, working all the way up to the strategic level of intercontinental ballistic missiles and tactical ballistic missiles. So we believe in the future that we're going to have a composite formation, something that has a mix, that has mobility, and gives us the integration into the combat formations. And then in the far right swim lane, you see more directed energy capability and less gun missile mix. And this addresses the cost per intercept and getting those things down. All of this over time, we believe, will give us the capabilities that we're able to defend against all threats, from counter-UAS to tactical ballistic missiles. And that far right, we don't know what that looks like today, and that's part of what the CFT needs to do. And that's where we get into the cross-functional cross-cutting of the CFTs. So as I work with the next generation combat vehicle teammates and how they develop that capability, we will inform them on our directed energy efforts that can be applicable to them as well. As they develop that platform, maybe eventually we will be on that platform with our capabilities. But with that said, I think I'll stop there to leave room for questions and answers. But I want to turn over to my great teammate as we work through this. I couldn't do this without Mr. Barry Pike and his team from the PEO and the PMs as we were developing this capability and working side by side.
Thanks, Randy. I appreciate it. Some of you, this is a redo for me. I didn't get it right on Monday, so back to do it again today. So obviously there's a strong case, a strong need for us to provide capabilities in the hand of the warfighters on a much accelerated pace. You heard the Secretary talk about speed, speed, speed. And so we need to be able to adapt at the speed of relevance. And that case is so compelling. So actually, how is it that we're going to be able to do that? Dr. Jetty, you just heard from him about some of that, but to me, as I thought about this, and I'll cut it down from what I talked about before to really just 2 points, teamwork and tools. And so really right off the top, and General Mcintire just mentioned it, also great partners with General Dickinson as well. It's not going to work. Accelerating capabilities to warfighters is a team sport fundamentally. One of the things Dr. Jetty didn't talk about that I will bring up that he's challenged the PEOs to do is to look across our boundaries. You know, so where does bureaucracy reside? Does it only reside in Washington? Does it only reside in the Pentagon? I mean, it's in my organization. It's in every major command in the Army. What does it take to break through that? It takes leadership. Exactly what Dr. Jetty said. So he's challenged us to look across our boundaries, look across CFTs, look across PEOs to do the right thing for the Army. So the Army's biggest greatest accomplishment thus far in moving this initiative forward is really organizing with the cross-functional teams under an operational leader, in this case, General Mcintire, with General Dickinson's senior leadership for the air defense community. And they're working, as General Mcintire said, directly with the combatant commanders, the labs, industry, to focus all of our efforts on accelerating capability into the hands of warfighters. So much like I talked about with long-range precision fires, where General Abramson and I partnered together to support General Moranian, pretty much out of my organization, we put our 2-star players on the cross-functional team to support both of those 2 initiatives that General Mcintire was talking about, where we're talking about getting after the THAAD Patriot integration. So Daryl Colvin from my staff, who's here in the audience today, actually as the acting deputy PEO soldier now, is creating great synergies there across the Army and accomplishing a lot. But we put him on the CFT to get after that particular issue in support of General Mcintire. In support of the Maneuver SHORAD initiative under the CFT, we put Colonel Chuck Worsham, who's one of my PMs, one of my stellar PMs. We put him directly on General Mcintire's team to get after how are we going to go about in partnership and support of those 2 initiatives. I think like General Mcintire alluded to, probably in air and missile defense and long-range fires, we were maybe a little bit ahead of the game because we have these habitual institutional relationships with those 2 commandants in that role. Them merging to take on this additional leadership role really just continued our efforts and really spurred our efforts to accelerate faster. So on the tools front, I won't go into a lot of detail. Dr. Jetty hit a lot of those. I will just say we do appreciate the support we've gotten from Congress with some additional tools. Again, first and foremost in my mind, delegation and empowerment. So delegation from the OSD level down to the Service Chief, Secretary, and Army Acquisition Executive level. I will tell you again, Dr. Jetty is pushing as much of that authority down to PEOs and PMs as he possibly can. And if we're going to make the process go faster, I think that's a huge enabler. I do believe strongly that modular open system architectures are a huge enabler, as Dr. Jetty was talking about with intellectual property, protecting those boundaries, having good interface control documents so that we know what the ins and outs of any particular box are, is a way not just to speed things along, but allows us flexibility, allows us to move faster, allows innovation to come in through smaller contractors who may not be able to bring a whole weapon system to the Army, but they might be able to bring a component technology that we really need and to make our systems work. Earlier prototyping and experimentation, again, we're all over that. Smart contracting in terms of using other transaction authorities. I'll give you just a hook there as I transition. So if you want to ask some questions about how we accelerated some of the counter-UAS capabilities, that we actually have two vehicles on display here with a multitude of effectors, both electronic warfare, guns, missiles, sensors, those kind of things. I'd be glad to talk about that. And then also on Maneuver SHORAD, how how much and what we've done to accelerate that capability. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tom. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Barry. Happy to be here. I think it's fair to say that a new, or at least a renewed, problem has arisen. The prospect of conflict with near-peer adversaries who have spent 2 decades going to school on the American way of war. And a broad effort is underway, of course, in how to adapt military doctrine to this new reality. For the Navy, this is distributed lethality. That concept complicates an adversary's surveillance and targeting problem by putting strike assets on anything that floats. And for the Army and Marine Corps, the rethinking is called multi-domain battle. Until recently, and really until the CFTs, air and missile defense seemed a little light in the discussion about multi-domain battle. In January 2017, the then director of the Army Capabilities Integration Center, one General H.R. McMaster, described missile defense as a foundational capability to support forward forces and bolster deterrence. Unfortunately, today's force falls far short of being an effective foundation for high-end air and missile battle. Indeed, the current air and missile defense force is far too susceptible to suppression. It's overly brittle, with too many gaps and seams. Several factors have contributed to this shortfall, including vertical stovepiped organization, too many single points of failure, relative under-attention to non-ballistic threats, increased cost and diminished capacity, and over-reliance on sectored ground-based radars. Just one episode that illustrates many of these comes from last summer, when a North Korean drone was found crashed in a tree with a video camera aboard. They'd been surveilling the THAAD site in South Korea. But if instead of surveillance, instead of a camera, it had an explosive device and was sent into the face of the single TPY-2 radar in which the entire THAAD system depends, it would have virtually incapacitated all of that missile defense goodness. Now, these trends have been a long time coming. The Army's been working on a 360-degree radar, for instance, since the early 1990s, over a quarter century ago, back when cruise missiles were young. And a few years ago, the country canceled the only program for a wide-range, persistent overhead tracking radar for such things, but the requirement that JLENS had supported, at least in principle, is still there. Now, the foundation for integrated air and missile defense is, as it always has been, network centrism. And that effort is coming along slowly with IBCS and some other means for horizontal integration, like Patriot THAAD interoperability, Patriot launch on remote, and a broader sensor-shooter integration effort as a state of being. But the question is, after integration, then what? Now, in January, we put out a paper called Distributed Defense with some ideas about this. Usually, the conversation is about capacity and capability, but some operational, material, and enabling concepts might also help transform the force. And let me throw out about 6 buckets that might support a more flexible and resilient force, building in roughly sequential order. The first is element dispersal. Instead of those stovepipes of excellence, increased networking permits that componentization and the increased dispersal of sensors, shooters, and C2. PACOM's recent fielding of the 5 dismounted Patriot ICCs is one example of flattening those stovepipes, as is the THAAD MSE linkages General Mcintire talked about, and remoting THAAD launchers. Another way to boost flexibility is to mix defensive interceptors, perhaps within a single launcher. The newer Patriot launchers have some of this, but more could be done, like the Navy's vertical launching system and the Army's multi-mission launcher. But further mixing and matching might be possible to create a kind of layered defense in a box, or at least a layered defense in a battery or battalion, like the composite battalion concepts described by General Mcintire: SHORAD and IFPC and Patriot, Patriot and THAAD. Another way to get at it is with offense-defense integration, how we think about fires, making them more multifunctional. ATACMS and other missiles have gotten additional missions. But the idea here, and I really credit General Formica for pushing a lot of this, you might say, is to think about a fires force and, in a way, an air missile defense force that can shoot back. Still further flexibility and an offense-defense integration comes from building in multi-mission capability into the interceptor airframe itself. ATACMS, as I said, but also SM-6 has some of this stuff. But another imperative of Vision 2020 was passive defense. And if we're serious about resilience in great power conflict, we'd better be serious about concealment and deception. And one idea that may need reconsidering is containerized fires, rockets in a box. Today, most air and missile defense launchers are in trucks, trailers, or silos. But building on element dispersal, some might be instead put into nondescript cargo containers littered around a base. And containerization would in turn support a giant shell game. Some containers would be full, but many would be empty, complicating an adversary's planning. The decoys would have not merely visual, but thermal, electromagnetic, and logistical signatures. They wouldn't be mobile, but would be good for supporting the joint defense of fixed sites. In sum, adversaries have been working hard to impose costs on U.S. power projection by embracing launcher flexibility, offense-defense integration, and a passive defense shell game. More distributed IAMD operations would complicate their surveillance and targeting and impose costs back on them. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. Good morning. So I'm going to shift gears just a minute and talk about the importance of workforce development and that perspective as we have this conversation about modernization. So my comments really don't necessarily just pertain to the Air and Missile Defense CFT, but really apply to all the CFTs. So we heard from the DAU South Dean, Mark Lum, on Monday as part of the Integrated Fires CFT, and he talked about DAU's commitment. And I want to reiterate that the DAU is committed to being a teammate and being a part of the solution to help train the workforce as we go through really a cultural change and focus on speed and making sure that we're getting the right requirements done early and helping to accelerate that capability to the warfighter. So a couple of things that in the near term that DAU is working on. One is in the area of OTAs, contract negotiations, proposal evaluation techniques. There's some seminars that we've been challenged to bring to the point very early and are in the process of doing that to help the workforce immediately to improve some skills in that area. But also DAU is embarking on a longer term effort to be very intentionally focused on our customer, in this case our customer being the Army. And so we're going through a process now of going out and having conversations with the key leaders to include the CFT leads. So General Mcintire will be knocking on your door soon, but the PEOs and all the key stakeholders, so that we can use that information to help define what and how to deliver the curriculum in a better manner for the Army as we go forward. So that's a little bit about what DAU is doing in the near term and to support the long term. But then I also want to hit what I consider three key elements of workforce competency as we go forward. The first one is, and I've got some notes on the charts there, but the first one would be developing a breadth of functional expertise. So I think as an acquisition professional, it's important to develop a strong depth in a particular functional expertise, whether that's program management, contracting, system engineering, test, logistics, whatever that may be. But then as you grow in your career, I think it's important to develop a breadth of functions and learn to master multiple functions and pursue multiple certifications, because understanding how these various disciplines interact together and what responsibilities each area has is important to be an informed acquisition leader. So I think we can probably do better to encourage getting back to that, developing a breadth of multiple expertise. The second area I would want to highlight is technical competency. And that's not just in the DAU lane as far as training in the DIWEA type courses, but I want to highlight the value of the Army laboratory and RDEX system. I see several of the lab directors that have been in here this morning, but we normally talk about the value of the research lab at the RDEX in terms of bringing technology forward, which is certainly their key mission, but it's also about developing that workforce technical competency. And Dr. Jetty spoke to that this morning about having that technical competency so that we know what the state of the art is as an acquisition workforce, and we can inform the key leaders at the CFT and higher levels of what it makes sense and how to accelerate that state of the art into warfighter capability. So I'm going to give one example of something, not to say this type of thing hasn't been done before, but it's an exciting initiative that the SMDC Technical Center is leading right now in the area of high-energy lasers. So they're looking at a concept of a high-energy laser technology complex, which is a collaborative effort looking to work with the research lab and the other RDECs across the enterprise, certainly to help enable those high-energy laser solutions like General Mcintire spoke to earlier in the plans, but also germane to this conversation about developing the technology, the technical competency in our young workforce, but also to, as we support those type of technologies over the life cycle, to build that technical competency. So that's an exciting thing. It's just in the formation stage right now. You'll hear more about that in the future, but that's a good example of building that technical competency in our workforce. Last thing I want to talk about is leader development and the importance of continuing to invest in leader development. From my perspective right now, I get to work, I have a great job, and I get to work with some of the best and brightest of the acquisition workforce as part of the Senior Service College Fellowship Program here in Huntsville. We have a similar site at Aberdeen Proving Ground, also in the Detroit area, and the Army will be adding one in the future at Picatinny Arsenal. So again, it's around these areas where there's a lot of acquisition activity, and getting to work with these leaders that are preparing themselves to go on to the next hard problems is quite an experience. And I just want to foot stomp how successful that program has been. To date, we've had 200-something graduates across the enterprise. That's certainly not the end-all of leader development. I think it's important that the Army continue to invest in that throughout the ranks in helping to develop those skills, the soft skills, and things like emotional intelligence, and things like the ability to be a critical thinker, and ultimately to be an intelligent challenger of the status quo, not a haphazard challenger, but an intelligent challenger of the status quo, will all contribute, I think, to that paradigm shift that the Army leadership has a vision for us in the future. So again, I'm happy to. There's a lot more I could talk about in this area, but to give time for questions, I will stop there and just say that DAU is absolutely supported to helping the Army. So, thanks.
Well, thanks, Bill, and thanks to the panel for your thoughtful opening comments. We've gotten several questions from you already, so we're going to get right to those, and I invite you to keep them coming. We've left about 40 minutes for you to hear what's on your mind. Like all of the capabilities in our Army, we are completely dependent on the contribution of the active and reserve components. And with that in mind, the first question is for General Mcintire. What is your vision, and you might want to comment on this as well based on how you're organized, but what is your vision for National Guard contributions as we go through transformation and move into MSHORAD division-focused formations? So you first.
Thank you, sir. It's a great question. First of all, I'll tell you it's a total Army, and we have great National Guard partners. Tremendous work that's going on with Brigadier General Tim Sheriff, Brigadier General Frank Rice from the 263rd AAMBC. Today, our National Guard units, 7 battalions of them, are fully employed 365 days a year protecting the National Capital Region. Presently today they have a battery that's on rotation and will be heel-to-toe rotations in Europe, working at the GMRC as well as with the 173rd and the 2CR over there to get back into developing lessons learned with short-range air defense being incorporated in those formations. They're getting into CTC rotations when and where possible, as well as spotting the 2 active duty short-range air defense battalions that do the counter-rocket artillery mortar missions that are in Iraq and Afghanistan. So our National Guard partners are very, very, very busy. With that said, and as a background, our intent, and to answer the question, would be to field them concurrently as best possible to give them the capabilities that we're going to have in the active duty side, so it's all the same. A composite formation that has maneuver short-range air defense as well as indirect fire protection capability in that, so they can have the capability plus the capacity to do all the things that we're asking them to do. So our big plan is to have 18 battalions of short-range air defense, 10 on the active side and 8 in the National Guard. So I advocate them that they have 7 battalions today. I certainly advocate for them to get an additional force structure to grow to 8.
So I'll just add on to that. So great integration with the Army National Guard as well as the reserves. And SMDCR Strat, we're the parent headquarters for the 100th GMD Brigade out of Colorado Springs, and has the Homeland Defense mission for the ground-based mid-course defense. So we've got soldiers in Colorado Springs at Fort Greely, Alaska, as well as Vandenberg Air Force Base. So on a daily basis, we've got actually what we call a tri-state arrangement or group from the Colorado National Guard to Alaska National Guard to the California National Guard, and those 3 states are the force provider, if you will, for those soldiers that man that system 24/7, 365. We've had this around for many years. It's been very successful. Matter of fact, we had the test last year, the FTG-15, which was the first ICBM intercept by GBI. The crew that actually conducted that test, the missile defense crew out of Colorado Springs, was actually a combination of active duty as well as National Guardsmen. So even in our crews, we're integrated between the active and the Guard. While this isn't a space topic, I will tell you on the space side of the house, we have the 1st Space Brigade that's part of this command, headquartered in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and we actually have all 3 components within that brigade. We have active, National Guard, as well as reserve. So the integration for all the multi-compos is very important to the air and missile defense enterprise. It has always been, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think we actually uncased the colors of was it the 678th out of the National Guard yesterday, I believe, in Europe. So even in Europe, as I talked in my remarks about getting after that capability gap that we identified, bringing some of the Avengers and Stingers back into the active force as well as the Guard, and it's really been in the Guard for many years. We're actually using National Guard soldiers as that immediate force in Europe as we get ready to stand up a couple of more SHORAD battalions.
Okay, thanks. The next 2 questions I'm going to pair deal with risk. And so the general question that came in is, with this approach in Army Futures Command and CFTs, pressing for speed brings risk. So for the panel, what allowances and provisions are being considered to accept such risks? You'd be thinking about that. Mr. Pike has a more specific question related to risk management, and we'll just pair these 2. So, Barry?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I didn't hit it this morning in my opening comments, but one of the things I did relay on the Long Range Precision Fires panel is, with this delegation of authority and empowerment down to the lowest level possible to get things done on a faster basis, what you really need to enable that and to stay on track are good metrics and people that understand how to manage risk. And so I know the Secretary of the Army, the leadership, they're meeting on a weekly basis. They have an industry background. Industry measures what they're doing, what their business is doing, how they're moving forward. They're transforming the Army. I've been in a couple of 3 of those meetings already on metrics associated with acquisition programs. They are going to transform the Army into a metrics-based organization. We are going to measure ourselves, hold ourselves accountable to delivering products. They are setting the leadership example that'll flow throughout the Army. That'll be instantiated, I think, all the way down to the lowest levels of the Army. So the specific question, and I mean, project managers, this is a fundamental, like Bill was talking about, and this is a fundamental thing that project managers, whether you're in industry or whether you're in government, that you're trained to do. Which risks to accept, how to manage risks, how to reach out to peers and get training, education to be able to deal with risk. The specific question that I had to do with cyber and supply chain risks and vulnerabilities. Ultimately determine whether weapons and networks perform as designed on the battlefield. What's the Army doing to ensure that cyber and supply chain vulnerabilities are mitigated throughout the life cycle, both development and sustainment? So I'll tell you, within our organization, I think it's fairly much true across the Army, you have to have a disciplined and I know we don't like to use the word process, but if you're going to get to a product that is supportable and sustainable and survivable, in some cases you have to have practitioners of processes that are experts. And so we take a disciplined process to, first of all, identify where those vulnerabilities are, where our attack surfaces are. We do that in a number of different ways. I know our supply chain does that as well, our industry partners. We have things in our contract requirements that require our contractors to do that. When we get material on the Army side, even at the component level, we bring things into the lab. When I say the lab, principally for us, we partner with Amardec here at Redstone. We have facilities. They've accommodated us to be able to componentize some pieces of our hardware, to actually run both destructive and non-destructive testing in ways that are contained, not exposed to outside people. We grow that from just lab environment to scale-ups from components to end items to system of systems, and then we take that out on the range, and we expose our systems to those kind of environments, all kind of operational environments. So when we talk about prototyping and quick prototyping and getting feedback on systems, there's always a little bit of this, the incremental piece that Dr. Jetty was talking about. You do have to get things out into the hands of soldiers quickly to figure out if it's going to, meet their needs from an operational standpoint. How are they going to interface to the system and use it? Secondarily, you also have to make sure it's going to work in the operational environment, that it's going to perform, it's going to be effective, it's going to be survivable, supportable, all the rest of those things the DOT and E community tracks us to. So I'll stop there just to leave time for other questions.
Okay, thanks. The next question is also a material question, but I appreciate that several of them that have come in have considering the full range of dot mil PF, so we'll get to some of those in a second. First one is to, again, General Mcintire or Mr. Pike, can you respond how we're addressing enemy UAS, particularly micro UAS and layered or swarming UAS tactics?
Okay. I'll take a crack at it first. So counter UAS. Our approach to this will be, it's a tiered and layered approach. Again, there's no silver bullet to get after this particular threat that as you continues to proliferate day by day. All you had to do was watch the Olympics and you saw the 1,200 drones up there that were moving around and from a snowboarder into the Olympic rinks to see, how fast this area is moving. But what we did with this is we got senior leader input as we talked to them. We talked about a formation-based approach, a combined arms approach. There's approximately 175 platforms in a brigade combat team. We can't have enough air defense systems out there, so we're taking a look at who's got primary and secondary roles. We're going to have to use electronic warfare measures as well as gun missile mix. This will be a total team effort to get after the counter UAS threat. It's really about a screening operation in the third dimension when you think about it. You got to keep the eyes off your formation just like you did on the ground. Now you have to do that in the air, and it's going to take a combined arms approach to do that. So as we went through, we decided that what we would focus on from an air defense as we're getting started, we're going to focus on the category 3 and above threats, and we're going to take a combined arms approach against the low, slow, small. Not that we are not going to do anything about it, but the realization is that we can't be everywhere on the battlefield. And so I think what you're going to find is we will address this with everybody in the formation.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that. So what Randy mentioned, I think, is important, is that we don't have one silver bullet, if you will, for every type of threat. So our ability to create a layered defense, whether it's against a missile threat or UAS threat, is very important. And so whether it's a kinetic or non-kinetic capability is important. because the idea is that we give as many tools to the maneuver commander in that capability that we're going to call air and missile defense on the battlefield. So our ability to influence that through non-kinetic means or electronic warfare, we've had very promising results in many different types of technologies that we're developing now, and we're actually experimenting with many of them around the world today, as well as the kinetic piece that we talked about a little bit earlier when we mentioned directed energy. So I think what's important is that it's a layered, and it's not one capability that we're putting our money towards. It's several, so that we can provide a variety of decisions or tools available to the maneuver commander.
I'll tag on there just a little bit as well. I agree that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. There's one particular urgent operational needs statement requirement that we've been working for about a year now. We put over 300 systems out in the field just within a matter of days and weeks. We continue to improve on that product. An unabashed plug for our counter-UAS team. They actually have 2 of the vehicles here at the show. If you haven't been out in the outside displays, I'd encourage you to do that. Talk to the teams out there that brought those capabilities together. I will just say that when you talk about countering air and missile threats, it's not just the layered approach. It's also what General Dickinson talked about with active defense, passive defense, attack operations, command and control. You really have to get at it with a suite of effectors and across all the combined arms. It's really kind of like the counter-IED fight. We know how to adapt and respond. As soon as we do something, we know other people are going to watch what we do, and they're going to respond. What we have to do is continue to think not just one step ahead, 5, 10 steps ahead. When we do something, what is the threat going to do to respond, and what are our countermeasures 10 steps ahead?
Dr. Carrico, any thoughts on this?
Well, you know, actually, the one thought on that was that I think General Mcintire, one of your slides talked about non-dedicated air defense, and I guess part of the requirements of getting that full combined arms look at this is just persuading everybody that, no kidding, the air and missile battle component of this is a big element of multi-domain battle writ large. And the fact that there's a CFT there means that that can be done, and you cited General Milley on that. But I would just point out as well that that's what we're seeing in Syria and in Ukraine. The combinations of the UAVs and the combinations of the missiles. Even the Houthis are bragging, whether it's true or not, we don't know, but even the Houthis are bragging in the Yemen missile war that they're using drones against Patriot radars for the Saudis and Emiratis.
Okay, the next is a 2-part question. First one's, I think, fairly straightforward, and then the second one is a Manning question. So we'll start with you, and anyone else who wants to add in. First is, to which echelon will IFPICs be assigned? And then the second is, our 14 series officers, warrant officers, and enlisted strengths are very low in the divisions. When do we think that the structure and inventory will rebalance so that the tactical formations can be manned to acceptable levels?
Okay. Good questions. The first one, I would tell you that for indirect fire protection capability, what echelon you'll see that? You'll see it down at the battalion level in what we hope to be in a composite formation. So I think you got to understand where we see that fighting on the battlefield. We see that as a great capability for our fixed and semi-fixed assets. Things that aren't going to be moving regularly, large areas like airfields, main command posts, et cetera, that need that type of capability. The big idea about indirect fire protection capability is that it'll have a larger magazine and deeper ranges. So that's how we intend to use it. But you should see that at all, really at from the tactical edge up to the operational level on the battlefield. In terms of manning, we are definitely growing the branch, and we are going through the typical struggles you have with growing the branch and that we need. But we feel like we'll get the recruiting that's necessary to do that. We're working on retention, but I would tell you that the Air Missile Defense Force has a very high op tempo. We 60% of our force is either forward stationed or forward deployed, and that has been going on since Desert Shield, Desert Storm. We have grown some capacity, but still we are putting a lot of stress on that force. We're working on getting improved incentives and relief of various missions to improve that situation for our force. In the meantime, we are working with Human Resources Command and the Army G1 to find all the incentives we need to be able to retain a highly qualified force and recruit against that.
Okay, the next two questions are training related, and it goes to the point about getting sufficient manning and how quickly we're going to be able to do that. But it was addressed to General Dickinson and General Mcintire, but given significant AMD growth, we'll be challenged to grow, which we just talked about. What are we doing in the line of effort 2 of capacity, and how can industry help? And really getting after how can we improve training, common human interface simplicity, and what other training issues we're going to help as we rapidly grow this force.
You want to take that, Randy?
Yes, sir. I can start, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, industry could help me by not hiring all of our people away, first of all. That would be like number 1 on my list, to stop stealing the talent for a while anyhow, as we're growing. Back to you, sir.
That's what I was going to say.
By the way, just to be equal opportunity, when I was talking about bureaucracy, we do negotiate contracts, and we do know there's bureaucracy out in the corporate world as well. When we sit at the table and we're ready to negotiate a deal, we expect people to be there that can agree to a deal, not to go back to corporate and find out whether you can do it or not. So I didn't mean to slight all the various places where bureaucracy exists, much like your issue.
Okay, to a broader point, though, are there training gaps that you've identified as we've gone forward with the issues in the CFT, Maneuver SHORAD and others, and what are we doing to get after those training gaps?
It's another great question. I need to give a plug to Major General Gervais, who's heading up the CFT for synthetic training environment. She's working hard to understand our TADS devices in the future. I'll give you an example. As we stood up the Stinger training base, as we went back out there and started training those 5 BCTs, we came up with a virtual Stinger dome that helps us with our sustainment training. But really the focus of the CFTs as we jump-started over the last several months is to kind of get our own program started. But what you'll see over the next several months is the horizontal cross-cutting CFT work, and we'll continue to work with General Gervais and the synthetic training environment to improve the training devices that we'll need for all of our capabilities, as well as work with Mr. Willie Nelson that's doing PNT, and Major General Gallagher, who's network. We all are in this together as we move forward. We can't have our independent stovepipe efforts, so it's important to do that. But to the larger question, we're going to need great training devices that move us into the 21st century to be developed and worked on.
Okay, thanks. This one's really going to be directed, I think, it was addressed to General Mcintire, but I want to start with Mr. Pike. It says when will, I think maybe the question is, will the requirement for IBCS be updated to include integration of C2BMC for enhanced command and control of the overall BMDS mission?
So I think the requirement is already there, and as a matter of fact, we're already testing with the Missile Defense Agency, already part of their integrated master test program. So we're able to connect with MDA's C2BMC right here from Redstone Arsenal to connect into the facilities out at Colorado Springs. We're also able to do our joint interoperability test certifications and our Army interoperability certifications right here from Redstone. So MRDEC, again, has done a great job in building up the capacity and capability to allow us to have hardware-in-the-loop facilities for all of our systems. And when I say all of our systems, I mean THAAD, Patriot, IFPC, IBCS, right on down the line, including a lot of the systems besides and above THAAD that have representations here right in the Huntsville area. Operationally, we connect to do a lot of that testing with Colorado Springs, where there's additional infrastructure from the Missile Defense Agency. So I think we already have the requirement. We are already testing.
I'll just add on to that from a CFT perspective. We're working on the upper tier and lower tier integration, and MDA's been a great partner as we do that, because THAAD is a program that they have their hands on today, and Patriot is one that belongs to the Army. So you have it's not a seam, but you definitely got to work side by side with them, and they've been great on understanding really General Brooks's priorities that are coming from that theater, and they readjusted their plan to get after putting capability in the hands of the warfighter sooner. The thing that we've taken on a role from the CFT is providing leadership and bringing industry in to develop the solutions that will inform IBCS in later increments today. So we're not paying for things twice, and everything that we're doing now is not going to be a niche system, and that it fits into the overall architecture down the road, and then, you know, for lack of a better term, it fits into the IBCS style guide.
And I'll just add on to that. So in terms of the integration, the layering that goes on, the enterprise, not just the Army enterprise for missile defense, but the joint enterprise is aggressively looking at every opportunity and every system of how it can integrate with the other service system of choice. For example, like we just talked about IBCS and C2BMC, that capability that would bring would be almost a 10x, if you will, in terms of being able to provide a very single integrated type of air picture, threat picture that will be very important for not only what we do in the protection of the homeland, but also in the theaters around the world.
Thanks. Mr. Colson, this one is for you. We've had many acquisition reform initiatives before. Why will this one be different?
Good question. I hear that a lot. It's funny, working with the Senior Service College Fellows this year, the idea, when they came into the program, the idea of a Futures Command and a CFT structure had not even been introduced yet. That has all happened in the last few months. And so it's been interesting as we've watched and had interaction with senior leaders across the Army to kind of understand where we're going. What I think makes this different is, frankly, it's the unity of vision. It really starts at OSD level, down through the Secretary, what we heard Monday, to the Chief, to the Vice, all the way down to the CFT leads. It's a common vision. The PEOs are integrated into this vision now, and so I think that is one of the things I see that is different. The other a couple areas would be empowerment. You know, the consistency of intent to empower and push down the decisions to the appropriate levels. And then third, the initiatives to reduce unnecessary reviews, and as we use the word bureaucracy, but to try to eliminate some of that unnecessary level of reviews, which really gets around to that risk-averse mentality that we've had for a long time. So to me, that's what I see as different about this. That's really going to, I believe, make a difference. So,
Thank you. Dr. Carrico, for you, you've provided some innovative ideas that should spur technology development out here by industry and could well become a menu for the CFT to address or to consider in the years to come. Do these ideas apply to defending the homeland as well as the regions?
That's a good question. It's true, a lot of this discussion has been thus far focused on the regional, and that's where a lot of this came from. But I think it absolutely does. The principle of distributed air and missile defense operations applies to the Homeland Defense mission, and it does so in a couple ways. You know, in some respects, one of the reasons why we're scrambling to catch up about some of these things is that we had been, in some respects, stuck in the 1990s, stuck with a kind of a fixation and a force oriented to the Scud or to the prospect of a North Korean ICBM. And it's not that got too much attention, but that it was, as I said earlier, the non-ballistic threats that got insufficient. Witness the divesting of the SHORAD force. And so, the question, how is the threat overall evolving? It's not that ballistics are less important, but that they're more complex, and that there's all these other non-ballistic things there, and that the threat is more omnidirectional. Now, Alaska may be, and probably is, the most strategic place in the world, but you can't do all of this mission from Alaska. And so when you think about cruise missiles and hypersonics, which can fly around or under our sectored ground-based radars, that's going to require a different architecture, presumably, for the homeland missile defense as well. And in fact, Congress told the Pentagon to go look at, in its forthcoming missile defense review, to specifically look at not merely ballistics, but also cruise missile threats to the homeland, and also the hypersonic stuff. And that's one of the reasons I talked about that as well. And so what might this look like? Well, it comes to our sensor architecture. We heard about General Hyten's remarks recently emphasizing space-based sensors. When you're looking in low or medium Earth orbit, you can't hide from those things if you're a hypersonic boost glide vehicle. A second aspect of this might be transportable and relocatable bigger interceptors. And so that's kind of the transportable GBIs concept. If we don't go kind of the third site for the continental United States, having the flexibility to relocate those things and to surge ICBM defenses in different ways might be very useful. But furthermore, the principle of layered defense is also going to come in here. And so this is kind of the discussion of, could Aegis Ashore have applications for the homeland, whether it's Guam, whether it's Hawaii, or actually in other ways. And I would suggest that in part that might evolve as a kind of an underlay to GMD, but there's another respect in which Aegis Ashore might evolve for homeland defense, and that's for the non-ballistic stuff. Thinking about the Mark 41s, not for big ICBM killers, but for that cruise missile defense mission as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Major General Gervais, in the spirit of having a CFT that supports, one of the two CFTs that supports the other 6, wanted to add a comment on training.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm Major General Gervais. I have the synthetic training environment, and I'm actually General Mcintire's phone a friend that was sitting down in here in case there was a training question that came up. And so we have been working very closely with his CFT and also the Fire Center to really identify where are the gaps in training, and then what is the capability that's needed to train, not just Stinger, but also the MANPAD, and then some of the future capability that he's bringing in. Because we kind of recognize that, the technology is very good. It's going to give us the overmatch and extend our reach. However, it's going to be training that allows us to hone our skills and really get that soldier, completely competent with that piece of technology, earn the trust within the leadership, and really kind of be the game changer. So there's a couple things that are going on right now in terms of our evaluation. We have just received kind of the training gaps that we're taking a look at right now. We're looking at potentially what are the quick wins that we can bring in quickly. In May timeframe, I have a force-on-force summit where most of the leadership across the Army is coming in, so we can take a look at what are the gaps that we have in our current live training environment to do force-on-force, because there's some things that we can't do that we will need to do in the future, especially if we're going to train multi-domain battle. And so I am very well connected with General Mcintire and his entire CFT along with the others. So as they're talking about bringing this new technology in, we are thinking about it ahead of time, not after the fact. So Randy, sorry I didn't want to leave you hanging.
It's all about CFT integration. We're happy for that.
All right, I've got 2 questions here. First question, what, if any, is the role of space in the AMD CFT? So and I've got a second question I'll follow on with that. So the role in the AMD CFT, particularly AMD CFT, is large. In terms of what you look at in terms of satellite communications, missile warning, that is all part of the AMD CFT. And the other point I wanted to make is that space is sprinkled throughout all the CFTs. We have an active role, SMDC Strat does, in all the CFTs from a perspective of space. And SMDC Strat is the Army's space proponent. So we have a seat at the table, and we're integrated in each one of those. In fact, one of the CFTs we have is the Assured PNT, which is actually led currently by one of the folks at Willie Nelson that works for SMDCR Strat. So it's very important, but space is sprinkled throughout all the CFTs, but in particular for the AMD one, we bring the missile warning and satellite communications piece to that. The second question, what role does space have in your AMD planning? It has a lot to do with our air and missile defense planning. As I mentioned earlier, from satellite communications to missile warning to the integration of those assets, it's very important what we do and is an integral part of what we do every day.
Perfect. We've got lots of other questions, but we're at a final timeline here, so I'm going to give the panel a few seconds to just give a closing thought, and with apologies if I didn't get to your question.
Okay, thanks. Only thing I just want to reiterate DAU's commitment to be a part of this solution going forward, and certainly support the Army and its workforce development needs.
Thank you. I want to thank General Dickinson for his leadership on kind of helping to shape this larger and robust and candid conversation about this stuff. The significance of integrated air and missile defense in multi-domain battle can't be underestimated enough. And again, I'm trying to throw out some ideas about how thinking about launchers differently, offense-defense integration, and passive defense can contribute to the new strategy for air and missile defense.
Okay, I know we addressed sort of the layered defenses, you know, as far as inside the Army and then with our joint partners across the services and with the Missile Defense Agency. There was a question that also asked about beyond that with our international partners. So General Rash, my deputy, is in Poland at the moment. Poland just signed today, sometime within the last 24 hours, a rather large foreign military sales case for the Integrated Air and Missile Defense Battle Command System and Patriot. And so this ability to interoperate with our allies is not something that's new to us. And so there's additional capacity that we've grown over a period of time where Army units actually don't have to go help defend some countries' assets that they find valuable. They can help in the common defense of themselves. So I'll just leave it with that, and I appreciate the opportunity from AUSA to be a part of the panel to talk about some of the great things that are going on across the Army enterprise, but also to talk a little bit in terms of transparency with the things we're still working to improve on. Randy.
My final thought is, first of all, I'd like to thank Lieutenant General Dickinson as the senior mentor in his role and the leadership that he provides to the overall enterprise. I'd also like to thank my CFT organization. That's a matrix organization. This didn't come out, but I think the big idea is that it's good to have a matrix organization with all the professionals that come from those different elements and the ability to reach back into those formations and get the expertise that we need. We got tremendous support from the PEO, from RDCOM, AMC, the Army staff, G8 and G3, across the board, ATEC, got testers embedded in there with us. So I've got a great team. We formed, we didn't even really storm much. We just started rolling up our sleeves and got after things. So I got to thank the CFT team. I also got to thank the team at the Fire Center Excellence under Major General Schaffner's leadership. They have really enabled us and allowed us to use all the resources that's been necessary to get going. And so I really appreciate the teamwork that comes out of the Fire Center Excellence. And
Thanks.
Yeah, great session today. Thanks to the panel members for your time today. I think we got after some good discussion here today, and thanks to General Formica again for your moderating the panel. In my mind, it comes down to a couple things. One is creating velocity. So we've got to create velocity in this enterprise in terms of bringing capabilities to the warfighters quickly so that we can start looking at mitigating the risks that we identified today. And then really, when you look at it, missile defense, air and missile defense is really everybody's business. So we touched on passive defense a little bit, but if you go back and look at the 4 pillars of integrated air and missile defense, many of those are everybody's business in terms of making sure you're taking passive defense measures, that you're providing intelligence, that you're planning an attack operations type capability along with the active defense. Our ability to influence the left of launch or the pre-launch or the right after, just after launch is very, very important in how we start looking at building our systems. We tend to always migrate to the kinetic kill at the very end, at the terminal or mid-course phase of the missile flight. There's many things we can do to the left of that, from the pre-launch, the before launch, to the boost phase intercept capabilities that we've heard talked about in not only the national security strategy, but the national defense strategy and some of the work that we're doing in the MDA. So it's very important that we all kind of consider this our business, and that we look at everything that we have in order to create a more equal equation, if you will, between kinetic kill, terminal phase, mid-course phase, and what we do before that. So again, thank you for Dick.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to close with, again, thanking AUSA for hosting this great event. Thank this terrific panel for their thoughtful insights on this important capability area. I'd like to thank industry for delivering the capabilities that they're talking about having to integrate to man, train, and equip. Thank you for those providing those capabilities, for your attendance and participation. And I always like to close these forums by saying that panels like this remind us that truly the most critical air and missile defense asset that this nation has are the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians who develop, deploy, and operate those systems. And it's for those folks that this panel exists and for why we do what we do. And so let's give them a round of applause and thank them for their service and sacrifice. Thank you. Thank you, panel.
Okay, well done. Thanks, General Dickinson, General Formica, and the panel. A great way to start off our morning. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be back at 10:35, please. 10:35. Thanks, Jim. That was excellent. I'm sorry we said I'll give it Formica.